Hello and welcome to the panel discussion, Food for Health, Food as Medicine, here at the Elevating Health Tech Innovation session of the F50 Global Capital Summit 2020. I'm Roger Royse. I'm a partner with Haynes and Boone, an international law firm practicing in the areas of corporate tax and business, serving primarily technology startups. I'm not only here as a partner of Haynes and Boone, however, I'm also the founder of our little group called Silicon Valley AgTech, or the Royse AgTech Innovation Network. Check us out on LinkedIn or on Mighty Networks. Well, this is one of a series of panels here at the Health Tech Conference that we've got that are focused on food and agriculture production and its role in health. And we've got a great panel of investors here today that have a particular expertise and emphasis in this. Let me introduce them briefly. Arama Kukutai is a co-founder and partner at Finistere Ventures, a VC firm investing in agri-food since 2006. As you know, Finistere is a major player in the space. It has been even before I got involved in it, and I'm extremely old. So, you know, we've got lots of experience here. Finistere invests globally in technology companies with offices in California, Ireland, Israel, and New Zealand. Arama is from New Zealand. He has deep roots in farm and food sectors based in San Diego. Secondly, Dr. Jaleh Daie is a thought leader in the space and frequent speaker, board director, advisor. She's an academic biologist. She served in the administrations of 3 presidents, worked in 8 countries, received numerous awards, including an award from the President's National Science and Tech Council. She was a professor at Rutgers, University of Wisconsin-Madison, and she is currently now a venture capitalist here in Silicon Valley. And of course, Rob Trice is another established international venture capital investor. He's the founding partner of Better Food Ventures and the Mixing Bowl. He has a background in telecom, mobile, and internet investing, which is interesting because that is a kind of a big sector in agriculture these days. And he's been with Swisscom Ventures, also Blue Run Ventures, and he is prior to that he's with a DC-based think tank, the Center for Strategic and International Studies. So with that, thank you all for being here. We've got like I say, a panel of investors, but with diverse backgrounds. So I think we're going to have a really lively and interesting discussion on the topics of food as medicine or food for health. So before we kind of jump into the discussion topics, I'd like to just take a minute to let each of you tell us a little bit for the audience who might not know you as well as I do, as to who you are and what you do and how you come to the space. So tell you what, why don't we start with Jaleh?
Thank you, Roger, for inviting me to join this panel. I know both Rob and Arama, and I'm very pleased to be in their company. As you mentioned, I started as an academic. For the first 20 years in my career, I was a professor and department chair and administrator at Rutgers University and University of Wisconsin-Madison. And then I was recruited to the Packard Foundation, and now I am investing in food and agriculture and other things, actually. Aurora Equity invests in everything across the board, but as chairman of the Band of Angels, the food and ag tech vertical at the Band of Angels, my main focus is food and agriculture. And I serve on a number of boards now, and basically that's what I do, invest in startups and serve on boards basically right now.
Okay, thank you, Jaleh. Rob?
Hi, my name's Rob Trice. I'm with Better Food Ventures and the Mixing Bowl. And as Roger said, I spent 15 years in the mobile internet telecom venture capital space and basically watched that space mature and was looking for something new. And my wife started running a cattle ranch. And so I was kicking around this cattle ranch and saw the opportunity and certainly the need to apply more information technology to food and ag. As we all know, that's 5 to 10% of the world's economy. And so when I started doing this, we didn't really know what food tech and ag tech really was. And Silicon Valley's IT innovation ecosystem wasn't engaged in food and ag. And so I launched the Mixing Bowl as a place for thought exchange, and Better Food Ventures is our group that applies IT to food and ag to make positive impact now. And we've invested in about 15 companies so far, all at the seed stage. We're raising a $50 million fund right now. I'm based in Silicon Valley and obviously spend time out on the cattle ranch that my wife runs just west of Silicon Valley out on the coast.
Okay, great. Arama.
Roger, thanks for the invitation today. Great to be here with Jaleh and Rob as well. So I'm a Kiwi, grew up in dairy farming family. I'm an agronomist by training. I'm one of the co-founders at Finistere Ventures. Prior, I actually was involved in running operational ag assets, and it's really what got me interested in the leverage of technology to improve food productivity, sustainability, environmental outcomes, and of course, nutrition. Today, my partner, Spencer Morn, and I run a team of about 15 people, investing out of our third fund. We've been operating since about 2006, investing in the food and ag space. And we're typically leading or co-leading Series A or B deals right across the food and ag vertical. We just started investments out of our latest fund here in January, right before COVID hit. And we're living in pretty interesting times as we sort of think about what is the next 10 years of food and ag tech investing going to look like. Yeah, this is definitely a seminal moment. So very timely to be joining this great group and yourself for this discussion today.
Okay, thank you very much. So to get started, you know, I hear VCs and investors, they always say define the problem or the pain point first, you know, or sell aspirin, not vitamins. So I guess the question I'd like to put out to the panelists here is, what is the problem with our food today that has an effect on health? You know, why are we having a panel about food as medicine or food for health? Would anybody like to maybe tee that up for me?
Maybe I'll raise my hand to get started a little bit. And I think, you know, as we were talking about the panel and thinking about what is the scope, maybe we can make a distinction between food is health and food is medicine. On one hand, if we look at kind of an en masse, you know, we have 2 billion people in the world that are obese or overweight. Sometimes we may think of and I would just say, you know, poor diet is the single biggest contributor to the global burden of disease at 10% of all fatalities. And so we got that as one thing, which is we have poor diet, we have overweight, we have malnutrition. We have 160 million children in the world that are stunted from that malnutrition. That's one topic. The other thing is how we can proactively use food as medicine on the opposite extreme, where we're pushing the envelope of understanding how we can actually nurture or fulfill our bodies and improve our performance through nutrition. And I see that as kind of the two extremes.
So I can add to what Rob just mentioned. Obviously, this dichotomy of, we have this global dichotomy of hunger, about 800 million people not getting sufficient calories, and then about 2 billion people who are getting overfed but malnourished, not in the sense of traditional malnourished, in the sense that we are not making the right choices of food. So the problem is more in the choices that we make in terms of what we eat, rather than what's the problem with food. Although the problem is also on the side of the food as well, because we have too many chemicals in our foods. We have crops that are not as nutritious as they used to be because the soil environment is depleted and such. So I think there are lots of dichotomies in the food system that we need to pay attention to, so that the food becomes part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And in terms of the choices that we make for our diet and what we choose to eat, I think marketing has had a big impact. We are encouraged to eat things that are not necessarily good for us.
Irma, did you have a comment or a view that you wanted to
Yeah,
add?
no, absolutely. Maybe looking at this, these dichotomies, as I think both my colleagues here have described them, we have a surplus of cheap calories, not good calories, in the food production system, and incentives and industrialization of food have lined up to encourage farmers right the way through food manufacturing, e.g., to in many cases align historically, especially post World War II, around transportable, long shelf life, long supply chain commodities, and that's reflected, in cheap fats and in cheap sugars, neither of which are things you necessarily want to be cheap or widely available, at least consumed in the way that they are. And it sort of also points back to the fact that I can sort of tell, growing up in a country where fresh fruit and vegetables were plentiful, that you still had to poke the kids to get them to eat their greens. So there's a challenge here as well too around how do you make nutritious, healthy, good for you food appealing, attractive, and desirable to consume. And so this is not just a case of economics and science in terms of nutrition and the price of food, but also food as an experience and its plenitude. If you look at, for example, statistics, and Rob's mentioned some, Jaleh's mentioned some, but one that I find interesting, look at the average plate size and portion size of meals as provided by restaurant associations like the ones here in the US. And since 1994, meals eaten outside the home have increased every year. I think this is the first year in 2020 due to COVID that we'll see a drop in that number. And portion sizes have increased every single year. And that's only possible because of cheap calories. So I think today's discussion topic is really quite interesting in terms of how do we address both the health condition, nutrition issues that we have in our food system, but also what changes are going to be necessary in the farming and food system for those things to be true.
Yeah, I'd like to add a little bit more to the health issue related to this. I don't know if you have read the book by Michael Pollan called The Omnivore's Dilemma. The thrust of the book is about what we eat and how we eat it and all of that. And sort of the conclusion of the book and his mindset is, recommendation, mindset, whatever you want to call it, is that this is what he says at the end, to wrap it up in just very small capsule. He says, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. And I think the second and third part are easy to understand. The first part, when he says eat food, by that he means don't eat highly processed food. Eat foods that are natural, fresh, local, without too much chemicals, etc., etc. So I love to remind people that keep this in mind. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants.
Okay. All right. Well, kind of adding on to that, you've convinced me that there's a problem with food. It's cheap. It's not good. We have problems with obesity. We have problems around the world with other food-related diseases. But keep in mind that this is a technology conference, and we're about technology. So I'd like to hear what some of the technology solutions are that are out there. You're in the field. You're investing in things. You're hearing pitches every day around young startup companies that are looking for ways to solve these problems. What hope is there for the future, and how can technology solve these problems? And again, anybody who wants to jump in.
I'll start with this, Stanford, and I would say let's take a look at use of chemicals that has been so widespread in the last couple of decades or so. Ever since the Green Revolution came about, we basically developed varieties of crops that they're highly productive under very optimal conditions. So we had to put a lot of chemicals on them, to whether it's pesticides or fertilizer. So if you currently look at what some of the technologies that are very important is biologics. We have learned how to make use of natural products that are already in the plants to use them against pests and such. One example is we use pheromones to confuse insects from mating. So there is no mating, and this is how you would control the population of insects. Another example is how you use plant and soil innate capabilities to provide nitrogen for the plant. In other words, some crops that are not naturally nitrogen fixing, now we have learned how to make them to tap into the nitrogen that is already in the soil and fix nitrogen from air and from soil. So these are just one example. And I'm sure Rob and Arama have more examples of technologies they can use.
Well, so Roger, I'll just jump in. So, we invest, we like to say, across the agri-food supply chain. And that means from seed to soil to supply chain to store to supper to stomach. And there are opportunities along that value chain. There are also specific opportunities from unifying that view so that we can look at, as Jaleh is talking about, how can we start to unify, looking at specific seeds and soils to optimize for supper and stomach, meaning human health, right? One of the important things that we've definitely seen a lot of progress on in the last, say, 5 to 10 years is a recognition of the gut microbiome. Now we're looking at the relationship between the soil microbiome and the gut microbiome. So we can look at the relationship between healthy soils and healthy foods and healthy people. That's really exciting. The science is still, we're learning more and more every day. But I think the more that we can look at those opportunities across the value chain, like in supply chain, what can we do to get fresher food, real food to people so they can consume fresh vegetables or even frozen vegetables at their supper to improve their stomach and their health.
Yeah, Roger, just to take a slightly different tack, I think one of the ways the opportunity in the food and ag space is from a techno-economic one. So these are massive, massive multi-trillion-dollar markets. So right along that supply chain Rob has just described, there are huge market opportunities. So market risk is really not the concern we're solving for. What we've seen is technology over time, including some that Jaleh just mentioned around crop science, for example, has evolved to produce quite scalable, large technical solutions for producing food at industrial scale and moving it along a supply chain that is beset by pretty thin margins for the most part. And so I think it's not surprising that a lot of the conversation we're having here today around food as health, it's partly a techno-economic response, right, to the fact that one is able to actually charge more for food products that actually have a health or a sideline benefit, that actually increase wellness and nutrition, not just satisfy the need for calories. And so from that sort of context, it's, I think, to think about what technology evolution is occurring to replace farming systems or conventional farming systems with really technology-enabled platforms. An example of this would be the use of fermentation technologies to produce now everything from alt proteins for meat, so the so-called cellular biology stroke cultured meat movement, replacing dairy, obviously, with again, both plant alternatives, but also, again, recombinant technologies that are starting to develop. And I think also it's interesting to look at the food ingredients space. So there's been some very interesting startups being developed in areas from sweeteners to replacing food dyes, for example, to fragrances. And again, the uniting characteristic across all of these, because technology development is expensive, is targeting products that have a higher value to the consumer, to the producer, processor, to other players along that supply chain, including, preventing food waste or shrink. So we've seen a very large round in a company called Appeal, for example, recently, which is very specifically focused on reducing food waste and increasing shelf life. So along the spectrum, as Rob was saying, there are an immense number of opportunities. I don't think the thing we're solving for is market risk. These markets are proven. We're really looking to try and reduce technology risk, which I guess comes back to the frame you provided earlier. And there's really, I don't think it's certainly in my career experience, been a time where there's been more interesting, I think, nexus of technology and capital coming together in the space. We track a lot of the investment data in this area through our work with PitchBook, and in the last decade, compound growth rate and investment coming into this sector has been 44% a year, sustained for 10 years. I expect we'll see a drop in 2020 for obvious reasons. Kind of a blip in a period of pretty sustained capital investment coming into the space.
Yeah, so speaking of technology risks, Rob, I guess I was surprised I didn't hear you talk about robotics or data or AI, because I've heard you give presentations on this before. Can you give us an idea maybe what the state of the market is out there right now? Everything seems to be AI, and that seems to be like an exciting place where there's lots of room for improvement.
Yeah, and I'll give you one example of a company that we've invested in, which is using AI for flavor profile matching. So that if you're trying, it's called Gastrograph is the name of the product. The name of the company is Analytical Flavor Systems. But so the objective there is to apply artificial intelligence so that you can actually anticipate what kind of product is most likely to succeed in a certain market. So if I'm trying to create a food or beverage product for Chinese coastal female millennials, this is what they're most likely to want. And so that's one application of using artificial intelligence to have a better hit rate in terms of new product development and so forth. That doesn't necessarily talk that much about the health topic, though. I think if you look at food as health, one of the big challenges that we've had is still organizing the information so that we really understand the profiles of different foods, whether that's from a chemical, biological, mineral, metabolomic perspective. All of these new things that really allow us to assess the information related to food ingredients and so forth. That's a big challenge. And then the other challenge that we have is
looks like we lost Rob here for a minute.
Roger, your question about robotics, I think actually post-COVID, robotics are going to be quite important in a number of areas for a number of reasons. Downstream and consumer facing, we are all looking for touchless, minimal points of human contact. So robotics are going to play big time at the downstream. Upstream on the farm, there is shortage of laborers, whether it's in meat packing companies or farms. So we're going to need robotics for those facilities. And so, or if you think about one of the facts of current life is that we want to have a verifiable, traceable local food. That means vertical agriculture and indoor agriculture is going to be important. So automation in those areas is going to be, robotics and automation is going to be a key factor, because one of the reasons that are not as profitable or not profitable as they should be is labor costs. So I think robotics is a huge part investment opportunity as we go ahead.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think thematically, I would just say at a practical level, we've been a little more cautious about automation investment, because of the general challenges in scaling hardware businesses. But I think that this is a point where COVID is having a profound impact and probably accelerating the trends around labor because of safety for workers. And so if you look at why does row crop agriculture have such fantastic economies of scale? Because, the big three, AGCO, Deere, C&H, have all mastered machinery that's capable of dealing with the primary function, spraying, harvesting, obviously weeding. Whereas when you look at high value agriculture, which is where a lot of the debate now is around automation, picking strawberries is extremely different from picking cucurbits, which is different from harvesting broccoli, which is different from picking pistachio nuts. And so part of the challenge has been that finding a common platform that can take care of all the different modalities of horticulture across, say, 20 different main crop varieties, none of which are really on a larger scale than 1 million acres. And I think it's been a slow grind on those points, but I think COVID has made all the other factors now essentially multiply in terms of effect. So I think the next 3 years we'll see a real burst of activity in this area. And it also ties to some of the things Rob was talking about on digital agronomy. So if we have drones capable of doing sub-millimeter scale field scouting, we have AI capable of doing pattern recognition and then doing prediction on things like disease and spread. We also have the capacity to tie all of this together with weather data, the pheromone type applications Jaleh was talking about before in terms of alternative crop management, crop protection. All these technologies are starting to converge at a level of maturity that's probably taken us more than 10 years to get to. And I think we're going to see a lot of adoption over the course of the next 3 to 5. But it also underlines, I think, that, ag in particular, the pathways and the sort of time to build these companies to high value is longer, partly because we're talking, B2B models, selling to farmers, selling to retailers, selling to big OEMs, versus the food companies who enjoy the ability to sell direct to the consumer and generate revenue a lot quicker. So like within our own portfolio, I think we tend to think of ag tech as more B2B and food as more B2C. Although there are, of course, on the ingredients side, there's a lot of B2B opportunities in food as well.
Yeah, well, thank you. So Rob, before you cut out there briefly, I think you were about to start to talk about some of the investment opportunities. I've heard a couple of you, all of you now mention that. For all of these new technologies that are going to be big, because it sounds like there's an opportunity here to solve some big problems. Where's the money going? Let's follow the money. Where are you as an investor putting your money? What are you betting on for the future?
Well, I think there's a lot of challenges out there in terms of what that we're looking to address. But one of the themes that we currently have is we're calling it the messy middle of food. And I think COVID has laid bare all of the inefficiencies in that space, which is fundamentally post-farm gate to retail. And there's a lot of inefficiencies that need to be addressed in that marketplace. That's definitely an area that we're targeting right now.
Okay. How about the others?
Roger, I wanted to say that actually for the last 2-3 years, I was very hesitant to invest because of the valuation and the madness for not, just falling all over each other to get into deals. But I am beginning to be far more active in investing right now, especially in food and ag. And I tell you why. Most of the people I talk with are doubling down actually in terms of how much money they want to put on the food and ag side. The way everybody is looking at this is post-COVID actually. It's a phenomenon that just happened in the last 2-3 months. Is the way you look at food and agriculture at these times of uncertainty, it's an essential. It's not a discretionary. We have to invest in this area. We need food. It is a defensive. When times are uncertain, money goes towards defensive spaces. So food and ag is defensive. And the third attribute for ag and food is the fact that it's a non-correlated asset. And so it has all the attributes for investment opportunities and in uncertain terms. So I don't hear anybody in my space, food and agriculture, that says we are going to back off. Everybody is triaging a little bit to protect their current portfolio companies, but they're not shying away in investment, new investments. They may be a smaller rounds. They may be bridge kind of investments, but people are not shying away from new investments, at least what I see around me.
Jaleh, I would agree with
No,
you.
I think,
Yeah. Go ahead, Arama.
I know, I fully agree with what you both said. I think just for context, the last decade since 2010, we've seen close to 40 billion flow into venture in food and ag at about a 2-to-1 ratio food to ag dollars, and partly on the food side because of the marketing costs in particular of going and funding companies that are going direct to consumer. I think we'll probably see a drop off of between 30 and 50% in aggregate, just really through macro factors. I think Jaleh's points are correct that food and agriculture are probably going to continue to do better than the average across all venture asset classes. But it's hard to avoid seeing some drop off, even just if it's down to being able to run and raise and run new funds and so capital supply. All that said, I would say we're sort of pinpointing three thesis areas. One I've touched on earlier, which is disruptive or alternative food production systems, so full stack solutions to alternative protein and indoor growing being two of those. But I can also see fermentation or molecular approaches to critical or high value ingredients also being pretty important. We are going to continue to look at opportunities in the food space where COVID actually is proving to be I think to Jaleh's point, it's a tailwind, not a headwind. So we've got investments in companies like Good Eggs and e-commerce retail in the Bay Area, Farmer's Fridge in Chicago, which is repurposing vending machines to deliver actually contactless buying of food. And then we just made an investment in a company called Tovala, which is a hardware-enabled meal kit play. Cooking at home, eating at home is here to stay. There are some changes that I think even as we reopen, we're going to see that online purchasing, I think, remains a sort of a consistent theme. And then the third one I would just touch on kind of ties to our health is, or food as health focus, is increasing interest in food ingredients against which you can make clinical health claims. I'd be careful against sort of describing these as pharmaceutical-like. Medicine, I think, is a stretch for this category, but it's the move away from baseless, the sort of normal FDA disclaimer language, which basically says we think this ingredient will improve your mental acuity, but we've got no evidence that proves that on the side of it. And of course, it's basically a punt on whether it works or not. So, we're seeing food manufacturers increasingly say, well, look, what would it take to actually build a clinical data set that supported the claim? Is this really a superfood or is it a bunch of marketing BS? And often it's the latter. So, is there greater value unlock in being able to, in a way, triage or bring together the nexus, whether it's field testing and crops, or whether in the case of human trials, the ability to get clinical data sets around the efficacy of food ingredients that have a medical or health benefit to them, of which there's a ton of money flowing into that space, because actually, just like consumers want to know where their food came from, they want to know if you're making a functional claim, is it real? Which seems not unreasonable.
I think another good area that I think there's a lot of opportunities, and it was mentioned before, is e-commerce. We all got into e-commerce in a bigger way the last 2-3 months. And once you get the sense of the convenience of it, you're never going to go back. So e-commerce is going to be also a big area going forward in food and ag investments.
Rob, I know you wanted to say something, so I'm going to give you the last word here.
Okay, well, I'd still, maybe I'll end it with a challenge. I think one of the big things that has been surprising to me is we've kind of hit it a couple times, but fundamentally, we need consumers to value more than just convenient and cheapest food. We need them to get to pay more. We need to have the CPGs embrace better food. And there have been a number of startups trying to get consumers to shop better. It's been a challenge. And, Arama talked about, we have this food system that's really been optimized for creating the most calories, the cheapest, transporting those. The question in my mind is, are we going to see the reaction from consumers and the ecosystem around the consumer, including doctors, right, to really value food as medicine? The average doctor in the United States only gets 15 hours of nutritional training. You can become a cardiologist in this country without getting any nutritional training whatsoever. And the relationship between a healthy heart and healthy food is quite obvious. And so there's a big nut to crack over on that end, on the consumer side, where technology can certainly help make consumers aware of the opportunities to buy better and value the food choices they're making that we haven't really seen yet.
Okay, well, with that, I'm going to go ahead and conclude the panel. I want to thank you panelists for being here. It's fascinating. We could talk for hours, I know, but Fortunately, we only have a limited amount of time and an unlimited amount of content and knowledge, I can see. So thank you again, panelists. Thank you, attendees, for being here for Elevating Health Tech Innovation, Food as Medicine. With that,